I came home to find two strangers standing in my bedroom measuring the walls like I was already gone. My daughter Carrie leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them like she owned the place. And her boyfriend Brandon was giving instructions about opening up the space. I remember asking very calmly, "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Carrie didn't even hesitate. She just smiled and said, "Mom, it's time you started thinking smaller. This house needs to be used properly." That was the moment I realized my own daughter was trying to push me out of my own home. If you've ever felt taken for granted by your own family, I'd really like to hear your story. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It helps me feel less alone in this. And if this kind of story speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. You never really know how far people will go until it's your turn. My name is Ann Hopkins. I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood what it meant to build a life that would last. The house the one Carrie now walked through like she owned it sits in a quiet neighborhood just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It's not extravagant, no marble floors or grand staircases, but every inch of it carries the weight of a life that was earned, not inherited. My husband Michael and I bought that house 32 years ago, back when interest rates were high and our bank account was, well, let's just say it wasn't impressive. I was working as a school librarian, and Michael was juggling two jobs, one during the day at a hardware store and another at night doing inventory for a distribution company. We didn't buy the house because it was perfect. We bought it because it was possible. I still remember the day we got the keys. We stood in the empty living room with nothing but a folding chair and a borrowed radio. Michael turned to me and said, "It's not much now, but it will be ours." And he was right. Over time, we painted the walls, replaced the floors, fixed the roof after a storm nearly tore it apart. We planted a tree in the front yard the year our daughter was born. Carrie grew up in that house. She learned to walk across those hardwood floors we installed ourselves. She had birthday parties in the backyard, scraped her knees on the driveway, slammed doors during her teenage years, and cried at the kitchen table more times than I can count. That house didn't just shelter us, it held us together. When Michael passed away 5 years ago, it felt like the foundation of everything I knew had cracked. He had always been the steady one. The one who could look at a problem and say, "We'll figure it out." Without him, the house felt quieter, heavier somehow. But I stayed. Not because it was easy, but because it was home. Carrie had already moved out by then. She'd gotten married in her late 20s, moved to Raleigh, and for a while it seemed like she was building a good life. But life has a way of unraveling when you least expect it. Her marriage didn't last. By the time she was 36, she was divorced, financially strained, and raising her son Tyler mostly on her own. I remember the phone call like it happened yesterday. "Mom," she said, her voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know what to do anymore." Of course I told her to come home. There wasn't even a question in my mind. She was my daughter. Tyler was my grandson. Family doesn't turn away when things get hard. That's what I believed then. That's what I had always believed. They moved in 3 weeks later. Just a few boxes at first, then more. Carrie said it would be temporary just until I get back on my feet. Tyler took the guest room. Carrie stayed in what used to be my sewing room. At the beginning, it felt right. There was life in the house again. Laughter. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. Tyler would sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I made dinner. Carrie would thank me for helping sometimes, even hugging me in a way she hadn't in years. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom," she told me once. And I believed her. I didn't keep track of what I was spending at first. It didn't seem important. Groceries, utilities. Tyler's school supplies, it all just blended into the rhythm of daily life. Carrie said she'd contribute when she could, and sometimes she did. But slowly, almost without me noticing, helping turned into handling everything. I told myself it was temporary, that she just needed time, but time has a way of revealing things we don't want to see. It started small. Carrie stopped asking before inviting people over. At first, it was just a friend stopping by for coffee. Then it became dinners. Then entire evenings where I would walk into my own living room and feel like a guest. "Hope you don't mind," she'd say casually, already setting the table. I didn't mind. Not at first. Then came the little changes. A chair moved here. A lamp replaced there. Decorations swapped out for things that didn't feel like mine. When I asked about it, she'd shrug and say, "I just thought it needed updating." Updating. That word started showing up more and more. "The house feels a little outdated, Mom. We could really modernize this space. If we ever decide to redo things, we should open up the kitchen." We. That word didn't sit right with me, though. I couldn't quite explain why. It wasn't just the changes themselves, it was the assumption behind them. The quiet, creeping sense that the house was no longer something I owned, but something we shared. Or worse, something that was gradually becoming hers. Tyler noticed it too, I think. Though he never said anything directly, he became quieter over time, more observant. Sometimes I'd catch him watching Carrie when she talked about the house like he was trying to understand something that didn't quite add up. Then Brandon entered the picture. Carrie introduced him one evening like it was nothing. "Mom, this is Brandon." He had that kind of smile people use when they want to make a good impression quickly. Polished. Confident. The kind that makes you feel like you're being sized up and reassured at the same time. He shook my hand firmly. "I've heard a lot about you." I wasn't sure how I felt about that. At first, he was just around occasionally, dinner here and there, helping fix a cabinet door, offering to mow the lawn. He had a way of making himself useful without ever quite crossing a line, but like everything else, that changed. He started coming over more often, staying later, then staying the night. Carrie didn't ask. She didn't even mention it. It just became normal. And Brandon had opinions. A lot of them. "You've got great bones here," he said once, standing in the living room with his hands on his hips. "This place could be something really special with the right updates." I smiled politely. "It's already special." He chuckled like I'd made a sweet but outdated comment. Sure. But I mean financially. You're sitting on a real asset here. An asset. Not a home. Not a life. An asset." I began to notice how often he talked about value, about potential, about what this place could be. And Carrie listened. Not just politely, but eagerly. They started having quiet conversations, the kind that stopped when I walked into the room. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being overly sensitive. After all, Carrie had been through a lot. Maybe this was just her way of regaining control. But then one evening, as I stood in the hallway just out of sight, I heard Brandon say something that made my stomach tighten. "If you play this right," he told her quietly, "this place could set you up for years." Set you up. I didn't step into the room. I didn't confront them. Not yet. But for the first time, I felt something shift. Not just in the house, in my daughter. And deep down, though I didn't want to admit it, I began to wonder if I had made a mistake, inviting her back. Looking back now, I can see exactly when things stopped feeling like helping my daughter and started feeling like I was slowly disappearing inside my own home. At the time, though, it didn't happen all at once. It never does. It's always little things first. Small enough that you question yourself before you question them. Carrie began rearranging furniture more often. Not just moving a chair or shifting a table, entire sections of the living room would look different when I woke up in the morning. The armchair Michael used to sit in by the window was moved to the corner, replaced by a sleek, uncomfortable piece Brandon had brought in from somewhere. I thought it would open up the space Carrie said when I asked. I stood there for a moment staring at the empty spot where Michael's chair had been. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, even though something inside me tightened. Then came the decorations. Family photos, pictures of Michael of Carrie as a child of birthdays and holidays started disappearing from the walls. In their place came abstract prints, neutral tones, things that looked like they belonged in a catalog rather than a home. Minimalist is cleaner, Carrie explained casually. Less clutter. Clutter. That word stung more than I expected. Those photos weren't clutter. They were proof that we had lived here, that we had mattered here. But I said nothing. That was my first mistake, because silence, I've learned, can look a lot like permission. Carrie's language changed next. She stopped saying your house entirely. It became the house, and then gradually, almost naturally, it became our place. We should repaint the kitchen. Our living room needs better lighting. We might want to redo the backyard next spring. Every time she said we, I felt a flicker of discomfort, but every time I pushed it down, I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that families shared space, that this was normal. It didn't feel normal. Brandon, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. He had made himself comfortable in ways that went beyond being a guest. He opened the fridge without asking, made coffee in the mornings, answered the door when the bell rang. Once I came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table, typing on his laptop like he had always lived there. "Morning," he said, barely looking up. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond. "Morning," I said finally, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. He had opinions about everything. The cabinets are dated. The flooring could use an upgrade. You've got great square footage, but it's not being utilized efficiently. Efficiently. That word again. Cold. Practical. Detached. One afternoon, I overheard him and Carrie talking in the living room while I was in the hallway. If you open up this wall, Brandon said you could turn this whole area into a modern layout. Way more appealing. And it would increase the value, Carrie asked. Absolutely. You'd be sitting on something completely different. Sitting on something, not living in it, not loving it, sitting on it. I stepped into the room, then making my presence known. Both of them fell quiet for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. "What are you two planning?" I asked lightly. Carrie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just talking, Mom. You know, ideas." Ideas. I nodded, though something about it didn't sit right. Tyler was in the room too, sitting on the couch with his phone, but he wasn't scrolling. He was watching. Quietly. Carefully. Our eyes met for a brief second, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite place. Not defiance, not agreement, something closer to discomfort. As the weeks went on, the atmosphere in the house shifted in ways that were harder to ignore. Carrie started hosting more often. Dinners, casual gatherings, even a small weekend get-together with people I had never met before. I would walk into the kitchen and find strangers opening cabinets, pouring drinks, laughing like they belonged there. "Mom, this is Jenna," Carrie would say, waving me over like I was the visitor. Or, "This is Mark, he works with Brandon." They were always polite, friendly even. But there was an underlying assumption in the air that unsettled me. They didn't treat me like the homeowner. They treated me like Carrie's mother, as if that was my only role in the house. One evening I came home from running errands and found the driveway full. Music was playing softly from inside, and the lights in the living room were brighter than usual. I stepped through the front door and paused. There were at least 8 people in my house, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, someone laughing loudly near the kitchen. Carrie spotted me almost immediately. "Oh, Mom." "You're back," she said, like I had just returned from a short walk instead of entering my own home unannounced. "I didn't realize we were having company," I said carefully. She waved her hand dismissively. "It's just a few friends. Nothing big." "Nothing big." I looked around. People sitting on my furniture, standing near the walls that once held our family photos, moving through spaces that used to feel private. Brandon approached with a drink in his hand. "Anne," he said smoothly, "we were just talking about how much potential this place has." I gave him a tight smile. "I'm sure you were." He didn't seem to notice the tone. Carrie pulled me aside, then lowering her voice just enough to make it seem considerate. "Mom, you don't have to stay if you're tired," she said. "We've got everything handled here. Everything handled. In my own house." "I live here," I said quietly. Her expression flickered just for a second, but then it smoothed over again. "Of course you do," she replied. "I just meant, you don't need to worry about anything." I stood there for a moment trying to decide whether to argue or let it go. In the end, I let it go. That was my second mistake, because what I was calling keeping the peace was slowly becoming something else. Something quieter, something more dangerous. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I noticed it in small ways. The way conversations would pause when I entered a room. The way Carrie would make decisions and inform me afterward instead of asking. The way Brandon spoke about the house as if it were a project waiting to be completed. And Tyler, he grew quieter. One afternoon I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table staring at nothing in particular. "You okay?" I asked gently. He nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't push, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was carrying something he didn't know how to say. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint murmur of voices downstairs, Carrie and Brandon talking late again. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I could hear the tone. Low, focused, intentional. And for the first time since they had moved in, a thought crept into my mind that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't just stress. Something was shifting in a way I didn't fully understand yet. And whatever it wasn't going to end quietly. It's a strange thing realizing that someone you raised is beginning to see you not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. At first, I tried to convince myself that Carrie was just overwhelmed. Life hadn't been easy for her. The divorce, the financial strain, raising Tyler mostly on her own. I told myself that maybe this was how she coped, by taking control, by reshaping her environment into something that felt stable. But control, when it's taken from someone else, doesn't create stability. It creates imbalance. And I was beginning to feel it in every room of my house. Carrie stopped asking for my opinion altogether. It wasn't gradual anymore. It was deliberate. One morning, I came downstairs and found that the cabinet above the coffee maker had been reorganized. My things, my mugs, my tea tins, even the small ceramic jar Michael had given me years ago had been moved to a lower shelf. In their place were new items, matching cups, sleek containers, everything neatly arranged in a way that looked curated. "Carrie!" I called out, trying to keep my voice even. She appeared a moment later, already dressed, phone in hand. Yeah. Did you move my things? I asked. She glanced at the cabinet like it was the most natural thing in the world. Oh yeah, I just reorganized a bit. It makes more sense this way. For who I asked before I could stop myself. She sighed, not dramatically, but with just enough weight to make me feel unreasonable. Mom, you don't need everything right at eye level anymore. I was just trying to make it more functional. Functional? There it was again. I stared at her for a moment, searching for something, any hint that she realized how that sounded. But there was nothing, just mild impatience, as if I were the one making things difficult. I liked it the way it was, I said quietly. She shrugged. You'll get used to it. That sentence lingered long after she walked away. You'll get used to it, as if my preferences, my comfort, my sense of belonging were temporary inconveniences that needed adjusting. That was the morning I first felt it clearly. Not just discomfort, displacement. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Carrie brought up the idea of me moving downstairs. We were in the living room and Brandon was there too, sitting back like he always did, watching, listening, waiting. Mom, Carrie began, her tone carefully measured. Have you ever thought about switching rooms? I looked up from the book I wasn't really reading. Switching rooms? Yeah, she said, gesturing casually. The guest room downstairs is actually really convenient. No stairs closer to the kitchen. It just makes sense. For who I asked again, this time more directly. She hesitated just a fraction of a second. Then she smiled. For you. Long term. Long term. I felt something tighten in my chest. I'm fine where I am, I said. Brandon leaned forward slightly, inserting himself into the conversation like it was his place to do so. It's just about planning ahead, Anne, he said smoothly. You know, making things easier down the road. Smart transitions. I turned my head and looked at him. I didn't realize this was your house to plan for, I replied. The room went quiet. Carrie's expression hardened immediately. Mom, he's just trying to help, she said, her voice sharper now. I didn't ask for help, I said. Brandon raised his hand slightly like he was stepping back from a misunderstanding. Hey, no pressure. Just an idea. But it didn't feel like an idea. It felt like a test. A suggestion meant to become a decision. I'm not moving, I said firmly. Carrie exhaled through her nose, clearly annoyed now. You don't have to get defensive about it. I'm not defensive, I replied. I'm answering your question. She didn't respond. But the look she gave me, it stayed. It wasn't just frustration. It was calculation. From that point on, the tone in the house shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. Carrie stopped trying to frame things as suggestions. She began speaking as if decisions had already been made. Tyler really needs more space, she said one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. He has a room, I replied. It's small, she said. He's growing. He needs somewhere he can actually be comfortable. I dried my hands slowly. And what are you suggesting? She met my eyes directly this time. That he take the master bedroom. The words landed heavier than I expected. My bedroom, I said. Our bedroom, she corrected without thinking. There it was, clear, unfiltered. I set the towel down carefully. It's my house, Carrie, I said, keeping my voice steady. She crossed her arms. I know that. I'm just saying it would make more sense. For who I asked again. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. We both knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling Michael and I had once painted together, and tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just a difference in opinion. This wasn't even just disrespect. This was repositioning. Slow, deliberate, and increasingly bold. A few days later, something happened that removed any doubt I had left. I came home from the grocery store earlier than expected. The house was quiet, too quiet. I set the bags down in the kitchen and noticed something on the counter. My mail. Opened. Not just sorted. Opened. Bills. Bank statements, even a letter from the county office, all neatly stacked but clearly not untouched. My hands went cold. "Carrie!" I called out. She appeared from the hallway phone still in her hand. "Yeah." I held up the mail. "Did you open this?" She glanced at it and shrugged. "Yeah. I was just going through things. Those are my documents," I said, my voice tighter now. "I was trying to help," she replied, already sounding irritated. "Some of this stuff needs attention." "What kind of attention?" I asked. She hesitated just briefly. "Property stuff," she said. "Taxes. Records. It's confusing, and I figured I could handle it." Handle it. Without telling me. "Did you call anyone?" I asked slowly. She looked away for a second. That was all the answer I needed. "Carrie," I said, my voice dropping, "did you contact anyone about this house?" "It's not a big deal," she snapped. "I was just asking questions." "What kind of questions?" She threw her hands up. "About ownership taxes. Future planning, normal things, Mom." "You act like I'm doing something wrong." I stared at her. "You are?" I said quietly. The room went still. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she shook her head like she was done with the conversation. "I'm just trying to make sure everything is in order," she said. "Someone has to think about the future." "I am thinking about the future," I replied. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Then start acting like it." She walked away before I could respond. I stood there in the kitchen surrounded by groceries I hadn't unpacked, holding pieces of paper that suddenly felt heavier than they should have. That was the moment everything shifted. Not gradually, not subtly, clearly. Carrie wasn't just living in my house anymore. She was positioning herself to take it. And for the first time, I stopped telling myself it was a misunderstanding. Because it wasn't. It was a plan. And I was already inside it. The night Carrie humiliated me in front of strangers, something inside me cracked, but not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a fault line shifting beneath the surface. It started earlier that afternoon. Carrie had mentioned almost in passing that Brandon might stop by later with a couple of friends. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, like it wasn't something worth discussing. Nothing big, she said, already scrolling through her phone. I should have known better by then. By the time evening came, the house looked different. Candles lit on the dining table. A tablecloth I hadn't seen in years spread neatly across it. Plates set out like we were hosting something far more formal than a couple of friends. I stood in the kitchen watching Carrie move around with purpose, her energy sharp and focused. "Are we expecting more people?" I asked carefully. She didn't even look up. "Just a few." "Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it." That phrase had become her shield, a way to shut down any question without actually answering it. By 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Then it rang again, and again. Within 30 minutes, there were 6 people in my house. Brandon arrived last as if making an entrance. He walked in with an easy confidence, greeting everyone like he was the host. "Good to see you all," he said, clapping one man on the shoulder. "Make yourselves comfortable." Make yourselves comfortable. I stood in the hallway for a moment, invisible in my own home. Carrie finally noticed me. "Oh, Mom, there you are," she said, as if I had just walked into someone else's gathering. "This is just a casual dinner. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy." I looked around at the carefully arranged table. The wine glasses already filled the strangers settling into chairs that had once held family dinners. "Who are these people?" I asked. "Friends," she said simply. "Brandon's colleagues. Colleagues." They smiled politely when she introduced me. One of them, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a bright, practiced smile, said, "You have such a beautiful home." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Brandon stepped in. "It's got incredible potential," he said. "We've been talking about that. We've been talking about that. Not Anne has built something beautiful. Not. This home has history. Potential. Always potential." Dinner began shortly after. I took my usual seat at the table, the same seat I had sat in for decades, but it felt different, like I had to remind myself that I belonged there. Conversation flowed easily between Carrie, Brandon, and their guests. Work investments, real estate trends, words and topics that seemed to orbit around money, value, and opportunity. I listened quietly at first, until Brandon steered the conversation somewhere I hadn't expected. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "there's a real conversation happening right now about transitional living." One of the guests nodded. "Absolutely. Downsizing, assisted communities, shared living spaces, it's becoming the norm." I felt a flicker of unease. Brandon continued, his tone smooth, almost academic. "It's about maximizing resources. Older generations holding on to large properties that could be better utilized. It's not sustainable long term." My grip tightened slightly on my fork. I didn't say anything yet. Carrie, however, leaned forward, smiling. "I've actually been thinking about that a lot," she said. "It just makes sense, you know, adapting to what people really need." Need. There it was again. The conversation wasn't abstract anymore. It was personal. I looked at her. She didn't look at me. One of the guests glanced between us, then back at Carrie. "So, what are you thinking?" Carrie laughed lightly, like it was all hypothetical. "Well, my mom's been living here for years," she said. "But it's a big house for one person. We've talked about maybe finding her something smaller, something more manageable." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Casually. Publicly. Like I wasn't sitting right there. I set my fork down slowly. "I don't remember having that conversation," I said. The table went quiet for a brief moment. Carrie turned to me, her smile tightening. "Mom, we've mentioned it," she said. "You just don't like to think about it." "That's not the same thing," I replied. Brandon jumped in smoothly, trying to soften the moment. "It's just about planning ahead, Anne," he said. "Making sure everyone's taken care of." I looked at him, then back at Carrie. "Everyone I asked." Carrie sighed, clearly annoyed now that I wasn't playing along. "Mom, please don't make this awkward," she said under her breath. Awkward. That was her concern. Not respect. Not honesty. Awkwardness. One of the guests tried to lighten the mood. "It's a tough conversation for any family," she said. But Carrie didn't let it go. "No, it's just practical," she continued. "I mean, eventually, this house is going to stay in the family. It's not like it makes sense for it to just sit here." "Sit here." I felt something inside me go very still. "Sit here," I repeated quietly. Carrie finally met my eyes. "For us," she said. "For me and Tyler." There it was. Not implied, not suggested, stated. As if it had already been decided, as if I were already gone. The room seemed to shrink around me. I could feel the eyes of the others shifting between us, the tension thickening in the air. I stood up slowly. "I think I've heard enough," I said. Carrie's expression hardened immediately. "Oh my God, Mom, you're overreacting," she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I'm reacting appropriately." Brandon stood as well, trying to regain control of the situation. "And let's not turn this into something it's not." "It already is something," I interrupted. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. And for the first time that evening, everyone was listening to me. "This is my home," I said, looking directly at Carrie. "Not a future asset. Not something to be passed around like a conversation topic at dinner." Carrie rolled her eyes. "You're being dramatic," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm being clear." The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable, real. Carrie pushed her chair back abruptly. "Can we not do this right now?" she said. "We have guests." "Guests?" I let out a quiet breath. "Yes," I said. "You do." I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't slam doors. I didn't raise my voice. But as I stood alone in the hallway listening to the muffled voices resume behind me, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Carrie wasn't confused about her role in this house. She had already rewritten it. And in her version of the story, I was no longer the owner. I was the obstacle. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even sadness. Something colder, clearer. For the first time since Carrie moved back in, I stopped trying to fix things, and I started paying attention. The morning after that dinner, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just revealed. It's strange how once something is said out loud, once the truth stops hiding behind polite words, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to pretending things are normal. Every look, every comment, every small action starts to carry a weight it didn't before. I moved through the kitchen slowly, making my usual cup of tea, but even that simple routine felt unfamiliar. Carrie was upstairs. Brandon's car was still in the driveway. The remnants of the night before lingered in the air, wine glasses in the sink, crumbs on the counter chairs not quite pushed back into place. I cleaned quietly, not because I had to, but because it gave me something to do with my hands while my mind sorted through what I had finally allowed myself to see. By mid-morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to argue with Carrie again, not yet. I needed clarity before confrontation, and there was only one person I trusted to give me that: Susan Carter. Susan and I had known each other for over 20 years. We met through a community fundraiser back when Michael was still alive. She had a sharp mind, a steady presence, and a way of cutting through confusion without making you feel small. Over the years, she had become more than just an acquaintance. She was someone I trusted with things I didn't always say out loud. She was also a real estate attorney. If anyone could tell me exactly where I stood, it was her. I called her just before noon. And she answered, her voice warm but immediately attentive. "Everything okay?" I hesitated for a second. "No," I said honestly. "I don't think it is." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Come by the office," she said. "I'll clear some time." Sitting across from Susan that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Grounded. I told her everything. Not just the big moments, the dinner, the conversation about moving out, the strangers, measuring my room, but the smaller things too. The language shifts, the opened mail, the quiet conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Susan didn't interrupt. She just listened. And the longer I spoke, the more real it all sounded, even to me. When I finally finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Susan leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Okay," she said calmly. "Let's separate emotion from fact for a minute." I nodded, though my chest still felt tight. First, she continued, "We need to be absolutely clear about the legal situation." When Michael passed, how was the property titled joint ownership, I said. "With rights of survivorship." She nodded. "Which means the house transferred fully to you upon his death." "Yes. And you never added Carrie to the deed, no. Never signed anything transferring ownership, partial or otherwise." "No," I said again, more firmly this time. Susan folded her hands on the desk. "Then legally," she said, "the house is yours. Completely. Carrie has no claim to it." The words landed with more weight than I expected. Not because I didn't know them, but because I needed to hear them out loud. "No claim at all?" I asked. "None," Susan confirmed. "Not based on what you've told me." I let out a slow breath. For a moment I felt relief. But it didn't last long. "Then why does it feel like I'm the one losing control?" I asked quietly. Susan's expression softened slightly. "Because legal ownership and emotional dynamics are two very different things," she said. "Right now she's trying to shift the second one in her favor." That made sense. Too much sense. "She's been opening my mail," I added, "calling offices, asking about the house." Susan's eyes sharpened. "That's a problem," she said. "A serious one." My stomach tightened. "What kind of problem?" "It could be considered interference," she explained. "Depending on what she's doing, possibly even fraud if she misrepresents herself. At the very least, it's a clear boundary violation." I swallowed. She said she was just trying to help. Susan gave a small, knowing look. "People rarely describe their own overreach as overreach," she said. I couldn't help it. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "That sounds about right." Susan leaned forward slightly. "Anne, I'm going to be very direct with you," she said. "What you're describing isn't just a family disagreement. It's a pattern, and it's escalating." I felt that word settle in my chest. "Escalating." "Yes," I said. "It is. You need to start protecting yourself," she continued. "Not emotionally, legally. Practically." "How?" I asked. "Documentation," she said immediately. "Everything." I frowned slightly. "Everything?" "Dates, conversations, incidents. Keep records of anything that feels off. If she opens your mail again, note it. If she brings people into the house without your consent, write it down. If there are any financial contributions or lack of them, track those too." It sounded clinical, but also necessary. "And if it gets worse?" I asked. Susan held my gaze. "Then you have options," she said, "but we don't jump there yet. First, we make sure you're in control of the facts." I nodded slowly. There was something grounding about that. Facts. Not assumptions. Not emotions. Facts. Susan paused for a moment, then added, "There's something else you should know. What I did a quick check while you were talking," she said. "The name Brandon Pierce came up in a couple of places." My attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of places?" "Business filings," she said. "A small consulting firm that dissolved about 2 years ago. Some debt records. Nothing criminal, but not exactly stable either." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Carrie never mentioned that," I said. Susan nodded. "That doesn't surprise me." I looked down at my hands. All this time, I had been trying to understand Carrie's behavior as something emotional, something reactive. But this felt different, calculated, influenced. Do you think he's behind this? I asked quietly. Susan considered the question carefully. I think he benefits from it, she said, and people tend to support situations that benefit them. That was enough of an answer. When I left Susan's office that afternoon, I felt clearer. Not better, but clearer. The confusion that had clouded everything for weeks was gone. In its place was something steadier. Awareness. When I got back home, the house looked exactly the same. Carrie was in the living room scrolling through her phone. Brandon wasn't there. Tyler was upstairs. Nothing looked different, but everything felt different, because now I understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't just tension. It wasn't just miscommunication. It was a quiet attempt to take something that didn't belong to them, and for the first time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I walked into the kitchen, set my keys down, and opened a drawer. Inside, I found an old notebook. Plain, unused. I sat at the table, opened it, and wrote the date. Then I started documenting everything. Because if Carrie and Brandon thought I wasn't paying attention, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Once you start seeing things clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee them. That was the hardest part. Not the confrontation, not even the betrayal. It was the quiet everyday moments where I could now recognize exactly what was happening and realize how long I had been ignoring it. I didn't confront Carrie right away. Instead, I watched. I wrote things down in the notebook Susan told me to keep. Dates, conversations, small details that once would have slipped past me. At first it felt strange, almost like I was spying in my own home. But the more I recorded, the more undeniable the pattern became. Carrie wasn't adjusting to living with me. She was reshaping the house around herself. And now that I was paying attention, the changes felt sharper, more deliberate. It started with the living room. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find the bookshelf Michael had built years ago completely cleared. The books were stacked in boxes against the wall. The shelves, once filled with stories, memories, and things we had collected over decades, were now empty. What happened here? I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Carrie barely glanced up from her phone. I'm getting rid of some of the clutter, she said. It makes the space look bigger. Clutter. That word again. I walked over to the boxes and knelt down, touching the worn spines of books I had read more than once. Some of them had notes inside. Dates. Little reminders of who we had been at the time. These aren't clutter, I said quietly. Carrie sighed. Mom, you're holding on to things that don't serve you anymore. Serve me. I looked up at her. This isn't about serving me, I said. It's about belonging here. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned back to her phone, ending the conversation without actually ending it. I wrote it down later. Everything. Because that was the new reality now. Nothing was small anymore. Nothing was harmless. A few days later, I noticed something else. My belongings, my personal things were slowly being moved. Not removed. Moved. Shifted out of shared spaces and into corners, drawers, places where they wouldn't be seen. A framed photo of Michael and me from our anniversary, gone from the hallway, replaced by a neutral print. A small vase I kept on the dining table moved to a shelf in the back room. Even the throw blanket I used every evening had disappeared from the couch. When I asked Carrie about it, she gave the same answer every time. I'm just organizing. But it wasn't organization. It was erasure. Slow. Careful. Intentional. And then came the moment that made everything unmistakably clear. I had gone out for about an hour, just a quick trip to pick up a few things. When I returned, I noticed a car parked in the driveway that I didn't recognize. 2 men were standing near the front door when I walked up. They were holding clipboards, measuring tape. I felt that same cold tightening in my chest. I stepped inside and stopped. They were in my bedroom, measuring the walls, the windows, even the closet. I stood there for a second, frozen. Then I heard Carrie's voice from the hallway. "Oh, you're back early." I turned. She was leaning against the wall, completely at ease. Brandon stood beside her, arms crossed, watching the workers like he was overseeing a project. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. Carrie pushed herself off the wall and walked toward me. "It's just an estimate," she said casually. "We're exploring options." "Options," I repeated. "For renovations," Brandon added smoothly. "Just looking at what's possible." Possible. I looked past them back into my bedroom, my space where strangers were measuring like I had already vacated it. "No," I said. The word came out firmer than I expected. "No," I repeated, stepping forward. "You need to leave." The 2 men exchanged a glance, unsure. Carrie frowned. "Mom, don't be dramatic," she said. "They're just doing their job." "They're doing a job I didn't approve," I replied. Brandon stepped in, his tone calm but controlled. "Anne, it's just an evaluation. No decisions have been made." "Then there's nothing to evaluate," I said. "Because this isn't happening." The air in the room shifted. The workers hesitated, then began packing up their tools. Carrie's expression hardened. "Seriously," she snapped. "You're going to make a scene over this, scene," I said quietly. "You brought strangers into my bedroom without asking me." "It's our house too," she shot back. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. I stared at her. "No," I said slowly. "It isn't." Brandon exhaled, clearly losing patience. "This is exactly what I was talking about," he muttered. "Resistance to change." I turned to him. "This doesn't concern you," I said. Carrie stepped forward, then her voice rising. "It does concern him because we're trying to build something here," she said. "But you won't let go of anything. Let go of what I asked. This house," she said. "This control, this idea that everything has to stay exactly the same." I felt something break, not loudly, but deeply. "This is my home," I said. "Not a project. Not something for you to build." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You're being selfish," she said. "Selfish? After everything?" "I took you in," I said, my voice steady but cold now. "I supported you. I gave you space when you needed it. And now you won't even make space for us," she shot back. The irony of that statement hit me so hard I almost laughed. "I already did," I said. "You just decided it wasn't enough." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The workers slipped past us quietly, leaving the house. The front door closed, and suddenly it was just the 3 of us again. Carrie, Brandon, and me, standing in the hallway, facing something that could no longer be ignored. Carrie crossed her arms, her voice lower now but sharper. "Dad wouldn't have wanted it like this," she said. "That did it. That was the moment. The line she should never have crossed." I felt the words before I spoke them. "Don't," I said. But she kept going. "He would have wanted the house to stay in the family," she said. "He would have understood that things need to move forward." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't recognize her. "You don't get to speak for him," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "I knew you'd say that." "No," I said. You don't know what I'll say. Not anymore. The silence that followed was different. Not tense, not emotional. Final. Carrie shook her head like she was done. Fine, she said. Stay stuck in the past. She turned and walked away. Brandon lingered for a second longer studying me, then he gave a small, tight smile. This isn't over, he said. I met his gaze. No, I replied. It isn't. He turned and followed Carrie. I stood there alone in the hallway, the house quiet again, but something had changed. Not in them, in me. Because for the first time, I wasn't questioning what was happening. I wasn't hoping it would fix itself. I wasn't making excuses. I understood. Completely. And once you understand something like that, you can't go back. You can only decide what comes next. The house went quiet after that. Not the comfortable kind of quiet I used to know, the kind that wrapped around you gently at the end of a long day. This was different. Tense. Careful. Like everyone was waiting for something, but no one wanted to be the first to move. Carrie barely spoke to me the next morning. She moved through the kitchen with clipped motions, opening cabinets a little harder than necessary, setting things down with just enough force to make a point without saying a word. Brandon wasn't there, but his presence lingered anyway. It had a way of doing that now, like he didn't need to be in the room to influence it. I poured my tea and sat at the table, my notebook open in front of me. I wrote down everything from the day before. The workers, the conversation, every word Carrie had said, especially the one about Michael. That one stayed with me longer than I wanted to admit. You don't get to speak for him. I had meant it, but it still hurt. Tyler came downstairs a few minutes later. He moved more quietly than usual, his eyes flicking briefly toward me before he grabbed a bowl from the cabinet. Morning, I said gently. Morning, he replied, his voice low. He poured cereal, sat across from me, and stared down at his phone without actually using it. Something was off. Not just the usual teenage distance. Something heavier. You okay? I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he nodded. Yeah. Just tired. I studied him for a moment. There was something in the way he avoided my eyes. Something unsettled. Like he was carrying a thought he didn't know what to do with. I closed my notebook slowly. Tyler, I said softly, you know you can talk to me, right? He looked up then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment I saw it. Conflict. He swallowed. I know, he said. It's just not my place. My chest tightened. Sometimes, I said carefully, it is. He didn't answer. Instead, he pushed his bowl away, barely half finished. I've got to get ready for school, he muttered, standing up quickly. Tyler. But he was already walking away. The conversation ended before it could begin. I sat there for a long time after he left. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Not just between Carrie and me. Something deeper. Something Tyler was caught in the middle of. That afternoon, the house was unusually still. Carrie had gone out. Brandon hadn't come by. It was just me and the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. I tried to read. I couldn't focus. I tried to clean. Everything was already too clean. So I sat and waited. Tyler came home around 4. I heard the front door open, then close softly. His footsteps were slower than usual, heavier. Tyler, I called. Yeah, he answered from the hallway. Can you come here for a second? There was a pause. Then his footsteps approached. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen backpack, still slung over one shoulder.
"What's up?"
he asked. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." He hesitated, then did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't want to push him, but I also couldn't ignore what I had seen that morning. "You seemed worried earlier," I said gently. He stared at the table. "I'm fine," he said automatically. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I replied. "But if there's something going on, something you think I should know, you can tell me. I won't be upset." That made him look up. "Even if it's about Mom?" he asked. The question landed heavier than anything he had said so far. "Yes," I said quietly. "Especially if it's about her." He swallowed, then looked down again. His hands fidgeted slightly on the table like he was trying to decide something. "I wasn't supposed to hear it," he said finally. My pulse slowed. "What did you hear?" He took a breath. "Mom and Brandon. They were talking the other night," he said, "after you went to bed." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. "They were in the living room," he continued. "I came down to get water, and they didn't know I was there." His voice tightened slightly. "They were talking about you." I felt my fingers curl slightly against the table. "What did they say?" I asked. Tyler hesitated again. Then he spoke. Brandon said, "It would be easier if you just left on your own." The words hit me like a quiet blow. Not loud, not explosive, but precise, carefully placed. "And Mom?" I asked. Tyler looked at me, his expression conflicted. "She didn't argue," he said. "That was worse than anything else." I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them again. "What else?" I asked. Tyler shifted in his seat. "He said if you moved out, it would make everything cleaner," he continued. "Like legally, financially. All of it." "Cleaner." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "And Mom?" I asked again, my voice softer now. Tyler hesitated, then said the words I think I had already known. "She said you'd come around eventually." I sat very still, letting that settle, letting it sink into the part of me that had still been holding on to something, anything, that this wasn't intentional. "She also said," Tyler added quietly. I looked at him. "What?" He swallowed. "That the house would be mine one day." That did it. Not because of the house, but because of what it meant. She wasn't just taking something from me. She was teaching him that it was already his, that it was something to expect, something to inherit, without question, without understanding. "Tyler," I said gently, "how do you feel about that?" He looked down again. "I don't know," he admitted. "It just feels wrong." I nodded. "It is wrong," I said quietly. He looked up at me, searching my face. "I didn't want to say anything," he said. "I didn't want to make things worse." "You didn't," I replied. "You told the truth." He let out a small breath like he had been holding it in. "What are you going to do?" he asked. That was the question, the one I had been avoiding, the one I could no longer ignore. I looked around the kitchen, at the table, at the walls, at the space that had once felt so certain, and I realized something. I wasn't fighting to keep things the same anymore. I was deciding what I was willing to lose, and what I wasn't. "I'm not going to be pushed out," I said finally. Tyler nodded slowly. "I didn't think you would," he said. There was something steady in his voice, something that gave me a small, unexpected sense of strength. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Thank you," I said. He gave a small nod, then stood up, grabbing his backpack.
"I've got homework," he said.
"Okay," I replied. He paused at the doorway.
"Grandma,"
he said.
"Yes, I'm on your side."
The words were simple, but they meant more than he probably realized. "Thank you," I said again. He disappeared down the hallway, and I sat there alone, but not uncertain, not anymore, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I knew what I had to do. I looked down at the notebook in front of me, then I reached for a pen, and for the first time, I didn't just document what had happened. I wrote down a decision. I was going to sell the house, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I refused to stay somewhere I was being quietly erased. And if Carrie thought she already owned it, then she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Once a decision like that settles inside you, it doesn't feel loud. It feels still. That's the best way I can describe it. Not anger, not even relief. Just a quiet certainty that something has already ended, even if the world around you hasn't caught up yet. The morning after I decided to sell the house, I woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the house, the same familiar sounds that had once comforted me. Only now they felt different. Not because the house had changed, but because I had. I got up slowly, careful not to wake anyone, and walked through the hallway. I paused at the doorway of my bedroom. For a moment, I simply stood there. This room had held decades of my life. Laughter, grief, quiet conversations with Michael late at night. It had been my refuge after long days, my place of rest when the world felt too heavy. And now, it had been measured like a future project. That thought didn't hurt as sharply as it used to, because I was no longer trying to hold on to something that someone else had already decided to take. Instead, I stepped inside, opened the closet, and began to look not at what I might lose, but at what I would carry with me. That shift changed everything. By mid-morning, I called Susan. "I'm ready," I told her. There was a brief pause on the other end. Ready for what she asked, though I think she already knew. "To sell," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "Yes," I replied. "I've thought about it. I'm not doing this to make a point. I'm doing it because I need to move forward." Susan exhaled softly. "Okay," she said. "Then we do it properly." And that was exactly what we did. Over the next few days, everything moved quietly, deliberately, strategically. Susan walked me through the process step by step, what needed to be prepared, what documents needed updating, how to handle the situation given that Carrie and Tyler were still living in the house. "We keep this contained for now," she advised. "No announcements until things are in motion." I agreed. Not because I was trying to deceive Carrie, but because I knew exactly how she would react, and I needed this to be done cleanly, without interference, without manipulation, without chaos. The house was listed discreetly, not publicly advertised at first, just shared through trusted channels Susan had access to. Within a week, we had interest. Within 2, we had serious inquiries. That part surprised me. I had expected it to take longer, but then again, maybe Brandon had been right about one thing. The house did have value, just not in the way he thought. The first time I met Daniel and Rebecca Lawson, I knew immediately they were different. They didn't walk into the house like it was a project. they walked into it like it was already a home. Rebecca paused in the living room, looking around with a soft smile. It feels warm, she said. Daniel nodded. You can tell people have lived well here. Lived well, not developed well, not optimized. Lived. That alone told me more than anything else could. We walked through the house together. They asked questions, but not the kind I had grown used to hearing from Brandon. Not about tearing down walls or increasing value. They asked about the neighborhood, about the tree in the front yard, about how the light came through the windows in the afternoon. At one point, Rebecca stopped near the kitchen table. This feels like a place where people actually sit and talk, she said. I smiled faintly. They do, I replied. Or at least, they used to. By the end of that first visit, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Susan handled the negotiations. I stayed mostly out of it, trusting her to guide the process. The offer came sooner than I expected. Fair, respectful, clean. I accepted. And just like that, the future of the house shifted. Quietly, without Carrie knowing. That part wasn't easy. There were moments, small, unexpected ones, where I would see her in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, talking casually about plans, about changes, about what we should do next. And for a second, I would feel something close to guilt. Not because I was doing something wrong, but because she didn't know. Yet. But then I would remember the conversation Tyler had told me about. If you play this right, it could set you up. And the guilt would fade. Because this wasn't betrayal. It was protection. Of myself. Of what was mine. Of the life I still had the right to live. Carrie, meanwhile, seemed lighter, more confident. She talked more openly about changes now. Brandon thinks we should open up the kitchen, she said one evening, flipping through something on her phone. I asked, though I already knew the answer. She didn't even notice. Yeah, it would make the whole space feel bigger, she continued. And we could probably redo the floors at the same time. I nodded slowly. That sounds like a lot of work, I said. It'll be worth it, she replied. Worth it. I watched her for a moment. She looked certain that this was already hers. Certain that the future she imagined was already in motion. And I realized something. She wasn't pretending anymore. She believed it. Fully. That belief was what made what was coming next inevitable. A few days later, I was sitting in the living room when Carrie walked in with Brandon. They were talking quietly, but not quietly enough. I spoke to someone about the layout, Brandon said. There are a few ways we could restructure things. Carrie nodded. Good. I want to start making decisions soon. Decisions. I closed my book, looked up at them, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't even feel angry. I felt ready. Because everything they were planning, everything they were assuming, was built on something that was about to disappear. And they had no idea. Not yet. But soon, very soon, they would. There's a moment just before the truth comes out when everything feels almost normal. That's the strange part. The house looked the same. The walls still held the faint marks of where pictures had once been. The kitchen still smelled like coffee in the mornings. Carrie still moved through the rooms with that quiet certainty, talking about plans as if they were already unfolding. But underneath it all, everything had already changed. The paperwork was nearly complete. The inspections had been done quietly, scheduled during times Carrie was out or occupied. Susan had handled every detail with careful precision, making sure nothing raised suspicion too early. Daniel and Rebecca Lawson had walked through the house one final time, their expressions warm, respectful. They didn't speak about tearing anything down. They spoke about settling in. That alone told me I had made the right decision. Closing was only days away, and Carrie still didn't know. I wish I could say that I felt completely at peace with that. But the truth is, there were moments when I hesitated. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew what it would do to her. No matter how she had treated me, she was still my daughter. And there's something about being a mother that doesn't just turn off when things get difficult. But then I would remember the dinner, the conversation, the way she spoke about me like I was already gone, and the hesitation would fade. Because this wasn't about punishing her, it was about refusing to disappear. The moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet, ordinary. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing a set of documents Susan had dropped off earlier that morning. Nothing dramatic, just final confirmations, signatures, details that needed to be double-checked. The kind of paperwork that quietly reshapes a life. I didn't hear Carrie come in at first. But I felt it, that shift in the air. "You want to tell me what this is?" Her voice cut through the silence, sharp and tight. I looked up. She was standing at the entrance to the kitchen holding a folder in her hand. My folder, the one I had left on the counter for just a moment too long. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I simply folded the paper I was holding and set it down. "What does it look like?" I asked calmly. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the pages again like she was hoping she had misunderstood. "This says the house is being sold," she said. "Yes," I replied. She let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Okay," she said, shaking her head. "Very funny." I didn't smile. "It's not a joke." That was the moment it hit her. You could see it. The exact second the possibility became real. Her expression changed. The confidence, the certainty, cracked. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Yes." The word landed between us. Heavy. Final. "No," she said immediately, like she could undo it just by saying it. "No, you can't do that." "I already have," I replied. Her face flushed. "What do you mean you already have?" she demanded. "I mean the house is under contract," I said. "The process is already in motion." She stared at me, like she was trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. "This is my home," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said calmly. "It isn't." Her eyes widened. "Yes, it is," she snapped. "I live here. Tyler lives here." "You live here because I allowed it," I said. "That doesn't make it yours." Her breathing quickened. "You didn't even talk to me about this," she said. "I didn't need to." I replied. That hit her harder than anything else I had said. Her expression shifted again this time, not confusion. Anger. "You're unbelievable," she said. "After everything I've done for you, I almost laughed. But I didn't." "Everything you've done for me," I repeated quietly. "Yes," she said. "I've been here. I've helped. You've taken—" I interrupted. The word stopped her. She blinked. "What?" "You've taken space," I said. "You've taken control. You've taken decisions that were never yours to make." "That's not true," she snapped. "Isn't it?" I asked. She opened her mouth and closed it again, because she knew, at least part of her did. You were going to push me out, I continued. You just didn't expect me to move first. Her face hardened. That's not what this is, she said. Then what is it? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she threw the folder onto the table. This is insane, she said. You're selling the house out of spite. No, I said. I'm selling it because I refuse to be erased inside it. The silence that followed was different from any we had shared before. Not tense, not emotionally clear. Brandon walked in a moment later, drawn by the raised voices. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Carrie turned to him immediately. She's selling the house, she said. He froze. Just for a second. Then his expression shifted, calculating, controlled. What do you mean, selling? He asked. It means exactly what it sounds like I said. He stepped forward slightly, his tone sharpening. You can't just make a decision like that without considering everyone involved, he said. I met his gaze. I just did. He exhaled slowly, like he was trying to keep his composure. There are legal implications here, he said. You've allowed Carrie and Tyler to establish residency. Susan Carter would disagree, I replied. His eyes flickered. That name landed. You spoke to a lawyer, he asked? Yes, I said. Of course you did, he muttered under his breath. Carrie looked between us, her frustration boiling over. This isn't fair, she said. You're just pulling the rug out from under us. I stood up slowly. No, I said. I'm removing the rug you were already standing on. She stared at me. You're destroying this family, she said. I shook my head. No, I replied. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Her eyes filled not with sadness, with anger. So that's it, she asked. You just sell everything and walk away. I held her gaze. Yes. The word didn't waver, didn't soften, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't speaking from emotion. I was speaking from certainty. The room went quiet. Brandon said nothing. Carrie said nothing. And in that silence, everything they had built their expectations on collapsed. They just hadn't caught up to it yet, but they would, very soon. The silence after I told them the truth didn't last long. It never does when control slips away from people who were certain they had it. Carrie was the first to react, not with tears, not with reflection, but with anger sharp enough to cut through whatever calm I had managed to hold on to. This is insane, she said again, pacing now, her voice rising with each step. You can't just make a decision like this and expect us to just accept it. I'm not asking you to accept it, I replied. I'm informing you. That only made her angrier. Brandon stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between us like he had some authority in the situation. Anne, he said, his voice controlled but firm, this affects more than just you. I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said. It doesn't. That's not how it works, he pushed. Carrie and Tyler live here. They have rights. They have permission, I corrected, which can be withdrawn. His jaw tightened. You're oversimplifying this, he said. And you're overstepping, I replied. That landed. For a moment he didn't respond, but Carrie did. You're unbelievable, she said, her voice breaking now, not with sadness but with frustration. You act like we've been taking advantage of you when we've been building a life here. A life, I repeated. Yes, she said. A future. At my expense, I said quietly. She stopped pacing, turned to face me fully. That's not fair, she said. I held her gaze. Isn't it? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling to keep control of the narrative she had been so certain of just minutes ago. Brandon tried again.
Look,
he said, softening his tone.
Maybe we just need to slow this down. There's no reason to rush into something like this.
It's not rushed, I replied.
It's decided. You didn't even discuss it, Carrie snapped.
I didn't discuss being pushed out of my own home either, I said. That hit her, harder than anything else so far.
I wasn't pushing you out, she said, her voice defensive now.
I raised an eyebrow.
No?
I asked.
No,
she insisted. We were just trying to make things better. For everyone. By moving me downstairs, I asked. That was practical. By measuring my bedroom without asking me, that was just an estimate. By talking about me like I wasn't even in the room, I continued. She faltered. That's not what we were doing. You said this house was going to stay with you, I interrupted. You said it didn't make sense for it to just sit here. Her face flushed. I didn't mean it like that, she said. Then how did you mean it? I asked. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Not honestly. Brandon stepped in again, trying a different angle. Even if there were misunderstandings, he said this isn't the way to handle it. Selling the house, it's extreme.
No,
I said calmly. What's extreme is trying to take something that doesn't belong to you.
That's not what we're doing,
he said quickly. Then why were you discussing how to play this right? I asked. The room went still. Carrie's head snapped toward Tyler, who had just stepped into the doorway. He froze. Realizing instantly what I had just done, Brandon's eyes narrowed slightly.
You've been listening?
He asked. Tyler shifted uncomfortably.
No, I just...
It doesn't matter, I said, cutting in before Brandon could press further. What matters is that I know. Carrie looked between us, her expression shifting from anger to something else, something closer to panic. What is he talking about? She demanded. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the truth sit in the room long enough to become undeniable. You said it would be easier if I left on my own, I said finally. Her face went pale. That's not, she started. And that it would make everything cleaner, I continued. Legally, financially. She shook her head quickly. That's not what I meant. And that the house would be Tyler's one day, I added. Now she looked at Tyler. Really looked at him. What did you say? She asked, her voice sharp. Tyler swallowed. I just told her what I heard, he said quietly. Carrie's expression hardened. You shouldn't have been listening, she snapped.
I wasn't trying to,
he replied.
You were loud.
That doesn't mean you repeat it, she shot back. Carrie, I said, my voice steady but firm. She turned back to me, her frustration boiling over again. You're turning him against me, she said. No, I replied. You did that yourself. That was the moment something shifted. Not in the room, in her. The anger didn't disappear, but it changed, softened just slightly, enough for her to try something else. Her shoulders dropped. Her voice lowered. Mom, she said, and for the first time since this started, she sounded almost vulnerable. You don't have to do this. I didn't respond. You're overreacting, she continued. We were just trying to plan ahead. That's all. Planning ahead doesn't involve removing someone from their own life, I said. Her eyes filled then, but not in the way I had seen when she was younger. Not in a way that asked for understanding. In a way that asked for control. What about Tyler? She said. Where is he supposed to go? I looked at him, then back at her. That's something you should have thought about before making plans without me, I said. That's not fair, she said again. Neither was what you were doing, I replied. Brandon stepped forward one last time, his tone sharper now. This isn't over, he said. You're going to run into problems. Legal ones. You can't just... I already have legal counsel, I said, and everything is in order. He stared at me. For a moment, the confidence he had carried since the beginning slipped. Just slightly. Enough for me to see it. You really went through with this, he said. Yes, I replied. The room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was realization. Carrie looked around the house, at the walls, the furniture, the space she had already begun to claim as her own, and for the first time, she saw it for what it actually was. Not hers, never hers. You're really doing this, she said softly. Yes, I said. Her shoulders tensed, her jaw tightened, and whatever softness had flickered a moment before disappeared. Fine, she said coldly. Then don't expect me to forgive you. I held her gaze. I'm not asking you to, I replied. That ended it. Not the situation, not the consequences, but the illusion. The one where she believed she had control. The one where I believed she still saw me as something other than an obstacle. As she turned and walked out of the room, Brandon following closely behind, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not relief. Something quieter, stronger, clarity. Because the truth was no longer hidden, not from me, not from her, not from anyone. And from this point on, everything that happened would be real. I thought the worst of it had already happened. I was wrong. What came next wasn't louder. It wasn't explosive. It was quieter than that. And in some ways, far more exhausting. Because Carrie didn't fight me directly anymore. She changed tactics. She went outside the house. The first call came 2 days later. I was in the kitchen sorting through a drawer that hadn't been opened in years when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me pause. My sister Linda. We didn't talk every day, but we spoke often enough that a random call wasn't unusual. Still, something about the timing felt off. Hey, I answered. There was a brief pause on the other end, then her voice came through cautious. Anne, what's going on? I frowned slightly. What do you mean I just got off the phone with Carrie? She said. She sounded really upset. Of course she did. I leaned back against the counter. What did she tell you? I asked. Another pause. She said you're selling the house, Linda said carefully, that you're forcing them out. There it was, the narrative, simple, clean, distorted. I'm selling my house, I said. Yes. Anne. Linda hesitated. She said you promised it to her. I closed my eyes briefly. I never made that promise, I said. She seemed very sure, Linda replied. I'm sure she does, I said quietly. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes. 10 minutes of me explaining something that should never have needed explaining. By the time I hung up, I already knew it wouldn't be the last call. It wasn't. My cousin called that evening, then an old family friend. Then another relative I hadn't spoken to in months. The story was always the same, just told with different words. That I had promised Carrie the house. That I was backing out. That I was acting out of bitterness. That I was being unreasonable. Each call chipped away at something. Not my decision, That remained solid, but my energy, my patience, my ability to keep explaining the same truth over and over again. By the third call, I realized something important. Carrie wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was trying to control how everyone else saw me. And for a brief moment, it worked. I felt that old familiar weight pressing in, the one that whispers, maybe you're wrong, maybe you're being too harsh, maybe you should just fix it. I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something I hadn't felt since the beginning of all this. Doubt. Just a flicker. But enough to notice. Enough to make me pause. And then Grandma Tyler's voice pulled me back. I looked up. He was standing in the doorway again, the same hesitant posture he'd had a few days earlier. "Yeah," I said. He stepped inside slowly. "I heard Mom on the phone," he said. I nodded. "That makes two of us." He didn't smile. "She's telling everyone that you promised her the house," he said. "I know. That's not true," he added. "No," I said. "It isn't." He shifted slightly. "Why is she doing that?" he asked. That question lingered in the air for a moment. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because it makes her version easier to believe. I said finally. He frowned. "What version?" "The one where she's not responsible for what's happening," I replied. He thought about that, then nodded slowly. "That makes sense," he said. I studied him for a moment. "You okay?" I asked. He shrugged slightly. "I just don't like how it feels," he admitted. "Neither do I," said. There was a quiet understanding between us then, the kind that doesn't need much explanation. "Are you going to tell people the truth?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair. "I already have," I said. "But I'm not going to chase every rumor. The people who matter will figure it out." He nodded again, then hesitated. "I told Aunt Melissa what I heard," he said. I blinked. "You did?" "Yeah," he said. She asked me what was going on. I just told her. Something shifted in my chest. Not surprise. Something softer. Gratitude. "Thank you," I said. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I just didn't think it was fair," he said. Fair. That word felt different coming from him. Less about argument, more about truth. Over the next few days, things began to shift. Subtly, quietly. The calls slowed. The tone changed. People who had sounded uncertain before now sounded more neutral, more open. A few even apologized. Not directly, but enough to let me know they were starting to see the situation differently. Carrie noticed too. Of course she did. The shift in attention, the loss of control, and it made her angrier, not louder, but colder. She stopped trying to argue with me entirely, stopped engaging, stopped pretending there was anything left to fix. Instead, she moved through the house like a stranger. Silent, distant, sharp. And then one evening she said something that removed whatever doubt had been left between us. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like she was measuring something. "You know," she said slowly, "maybe this is for the best." I looked up. "Maybe it is," I replied. She tilted her head slightly. "If you can't handle change," she continued, "maybe you shouldn't be living somewhere like this anyway." The words were calm, measured, but cruel, in a way that felt intentional. I didn't react immediately. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel hurt. I felt done. I can handle change, I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. Then why all this? She asked. I set the dish I was holding down carefully. Because there's a difference between change and replacement, I said. Her expression didn't shift, but something in her eyes did, just for a second. Then it was gone. You always make things more complicated than they need to be, she said. No, I replied. I just see them more clearly than you want me to. She let out a short breath, then shook her head. You're going to regret this, she said. I held her gaze. No, I said. I'm not. The certainty in my voice surprised even me, but it was real, because at that point, there was nothing left to question. No confusion, no doubt, no hesitation, just truth and consequences. And as Carrie turned and walked out of the room, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't the hardest part. Not anymore, because the hardest part had already happened. The moment I stopped trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. From here on, it was just a matter of finishing what I had started. The closer we got to closing, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful, not resolved. Just quiet in the way a storm sometimes feels before it breaks for the last time. Boxes started appearing around the house, not mine at first. Carrie's. She didn't announce it. She didn't explain it. But one afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw a stack of moving boxes by the wall, half filled with things that had only recently replaced mine. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in, not because I felt triumph, but because it made something final, visible. She knew, not just about the sale, about the outcome. Brandon came and went more frequently during those days. When he was there, his tone had changed, less confident, sharper, occasionally irritated in ways he didn't bother to hide anymore. I overheard fragments of their conversations. This isn't over. There has to be something we can do. You should have told me sooner. Blame had entered the room. And once blame shows up, control usually leaves. But it wasn't until 3 days before closing that everything came to a head. I was in the living room sitting on the couch that had somehow survived all of Carrie's updates when she walked in. No hesitation, no build-up. Just direct. We need to talk. I looked up. Then talk, I said. She remained standing for a moment, arms crossed, then finally sat down across from me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous, she said. We're still family. I tilted my head slightly. Yes, I replied. We are. Then why are you acting like this? She demanded. Like what? Like we're enemies, she said. I considered that for a moment. I'm not acting like we're enemies, I said. I'm acting like I have boundaries. She scoffed. Selling the house isn't a boundary, she said. It's a punishment. No. I replied calmly. It's a decision. Her jaw tightened. You're doing this because you're angry, she said. I shook my head. I'm doing this because I finally understand what's happening, I said. She leaned forward slightly. And what exactly do you think is happening? She asked. I met her gaze. You were trying to make me smaller in my own life, I said. In my own home. That's not true, she said immediately. Isn't it? I asked. Her expression flickered, but only briefly. We were trying to plan ahead, she said. You took it the wrong way. I let out a slow breath. "Carrie," I said quietly, "you had people measuring my bedroom. That was just— You talked about me moving downstairs," I continued. "That was practical. You said the house would stay with you," I finished. She stopped. For a moment, the rehearsed responses disappeared. "I didn't mean it like that," she said again. "Then how did you mean it?" I asked. Silence. The same silence from before, only this time it felt heavier, more final. She leaned back in her chair, frustration building again. "Fine," she said. "Maybe I got ahead of myself. Maybe." The words sat between us. "So this is it," she continued. "No discussion. No compromise." I looked at her carefully. "What kind of compromise were you expecting?" I asked. She hesitated, then said it. "You could keep the house," she said, "and just adjust things. Adjust things." I almost smiled. "You mean adjust myself?" I said. She didn't answer, because that was exactly what she meant. "You want me to stay?" I continued, but on terms that make me less present, less visible, less central. "That's not fair," she said again. "No," I replied. "It's accurate." Her frustration snapped. "You're twisting everything she said. I was thinking about the future." "At the cost of my present," I said. The room fell quiet again, but this time, something shifted. Not in me, in her. For the first time, she didn't argue right away. She just sat there, looking at me. And I saw it. Not regret, not fully, but something close to recognition. It didn't last. "I can't believe you'd choose a house over your own daughter," she said finally. There it was. The line. The one she had been building toward. I leaned forward slightly. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't choose a house." She frowned. "Then what is this?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I chose not to disappear," I said. The words settled into the room, clear, unshaken. She stared at me, and for a moment, she had no response. Because this wasn't about the house anymore. Not really. It never had been. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't wanted to see. "You're being dramatic," she said eventually, but her voice had lost some of its force. "No," I replied. "I'm being honest." She looked away, shook her head slightly. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. The conversation had reached its end, not because we had resolved anything, but because the truth had been spoken and there was nowhere left to hide from it. She stood up slowly, grabbed one of the boxes near the wall, and started packing. Not angrily, not dramatically, just quietly. I watched her for a moment, then stood up as well, walked past her, and out of the room, because that was the final shift. Not the argument, not the decision, but the moment I no longer felt the need to stay and explain myself. In the days that followed, the house emptied piece by piece. Carrie packed her things. Brandon helped when he could, though his presence felt more strained now. Tyler moved carefully between us, quieter than ever, but still steady. And me, I didn't rush. I packed slowly, intentionally, choosing what to take, what to leave, what mattered, and what didn't. Closing day came without ceremony. No arguments, no last-minute attempts to stop it. Just paperwork, signatures, finality. As I stood in the living room one last time, the house felt different again. Not because it was empty, but because it was no longer being pulled in different directions. It was still, whole, for the first time in a long time. I ran my hand along the wall near the doorway, the same place where we had once marked Carrie's height as she grew. Small lines, faded now, but still there. Proof of what had been and what had changed. I didn't cry, not then, because this wasn't a loss. It was a release, and as I turned and walked toward the door, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I hadn't lost my home. I had reclaimed myself. The first night in my new place was quieter than I expected. Not empty, not lonely, just unfamiliar in a way that felt both strange and peaceful at the same time. The townhouse was smaller than my old house. There was no denying that. Fewer rooms, less space. No long hallway filled with echoes of years gone by. But everything about it had been chosen. By me. That alone made it feel different. Intentional. I set my keys down on the small entry table and stood there for a moment, taking it in. The soft light from the living room lamp cast a warm glow across the walls. The furniture was simple, comfortable, and arranged in a way that made sense not for anyone else but for me. No one had measured it. No one had planned how to improve it. No one had suggested I move to make it more efficient. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. I moved slowly through the space, touching things lightly as if confirming they were real. The couch I had chosen. The curtains I had picked out. The small bookshelf I had assembled myself just days before. There was no history here yet, but there was peace. And somehow, that felt enough. The following days settled into a rhythm. A new one. I woke up when I wanted to. Drank my coffee by the window, watching the quiet neighborhood come to life. I started walking again in the morning, something I hadn't done in years. The simple act of stepping outside without tension, without the weight of conflict waiting behind me, felt freeing. I didn't realize how much of myself I had been holding back until I no longer had to. Susan stopped by one afternoon with a small housewarming gift, a potted plant and a smile that carried quiet approval. "You look different," she said, setting the plant down near the window. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how lighter," she replied. I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Not because everything was perfect, but because something heavy had been removed. We sat and talked for a while. Not about legal matters or paperwork, those were finished now, but about life. About what comes next when something ends in a way you didn't expect. "You handled it well," she said at one point. "I did what I had to," I replied. "That's not always easy," she added. No, it wasn't, but it had been necessary. After she left, I stood in the quiet of the room again, looking around at the space that was now mine. Fully, completely, without question. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't fully touched yet. Relief. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there. Tyler visited a few days later. He showed up at the door looking slightly unsure, like he wasn't certain how things would feel now that everything had changed. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He walked through the space, slowly taking it in. "It's nice," he said. "It's enough," I replied. He nodded. We sat down together, and for a while we just talked. Not about the house, not about Carrie, just normal things. School, friends, plans. It felt good, simple, uncomplicated, At one point, he grew quiet.
"I'm sorry,"
he said suddenly. I looked at him.
"For what?"
For not saying something sooner. He replied. I shook my head gently.
"You said something when it mattered," I said. "That's enough."
He seemed to relax a little at that.
"I don't think Mom understands what she did," he added. "I considered that."
"She might," I said.
"Just not yet."
He nodded slowly.
"I still want to see you," he said.
"You can," I replied. "Anytime." And I meant it, because whatever had happened between Carrie and me, Tyler wasn't part of that. He was just trying to make sense of it, and in his own quiet way, he had shown more honesty than anyone else in that house. After he left, the silence returned, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt complete. Carrie reached out once. Just once. A message. Short. Sharp.
"You got what you wanted."
I stared at the words for a long time, not because they hurt, but because they revealed something. She still didn't understand. She thought this had been about winning, about taking something from her, but it never was. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to explain. Some realizations can't be forced. They have to come on their own, or not at all. Days turned into weeks, and slowly something unexpected happened. I began to rebuild, not in a dramatic way, not with big changes or grand plans, but in small, quiet steps. I joined a local book club, started volunteering again at the community library, met people who knew nothing about my past, my conflict, my decisions, people who saw me as I was now, not as someone's mother, not as someone being phased out, just me. And in those moments, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I hadn't just left a house. I had stepped back into my own life. There were still moments of reflection, still times when I thought about Carrie, about how things had changed, about whether they would ever shift again. But those thoughts no longer controlled me. They didn't define my days, because I had something I hadn't had in a long time. Space. Not just physical, emotional, mental, the kind that allows you to exist without constantly adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something simple. Home isn't about size, or history, or even memory. It's about safety. Not just physical safety, but the kind that lets you be fully present, fully seen, fully respected, and for the first time in a long time, I had that again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I chose it. Time has a way of softening sharp edges, not erasing them, not pretending they never existed, but reshaping them into something you can live with, without letting them define you. It had been a few months since I left the house, long enough for the immediate tension to settle, long enough for the silence between Carrie and me to become something expected, but also long enough for life to move forward in ways I hadn't anticipated. My days had found a rhythm now. Mornings with coffee by the window, afternoons spent volunteering at the library surrounded by books and quiet conversations. Evenings that belonged entirely to me. No tension, no waiting for the next argument, no feeling like I needed to justify my presence in my own space. It wasn't a dramatic life, but it was peaceful, and after everything that had happened, peace felt like something I had earned. Tyler continued to visit, Not as often as I think he would have liked, but enough. Enough to keep the connection real. He would stop by after school, sometimes sit at the kitchen table, talk about things that had nothing to do with the past. And sometimes he would talk about it, carefully, like he was testing how much was safe to say. Mom and Brandon broke up, he told me one afternoon, his voice casual, but his eyes watching my reaction closely. I paused for a moment. Not surprised. Just thoughtful. "Are you okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I think so," he said. "It was kind of expected." I nodded. "Sometimes people build things on the wrong foundation," I said quietly. "And eventually, it shows." He seemed to understand that. More than someone his age probably should. "She's been different," he added after a moment. How I asked. "Quieter," he said. "Not as sure about everything." That didn't surprise me either, because certainty built on assumptions doesn't last when those assumptions collapse. "And you?" I asked. He gave a small smile. "I think I'm just trying to stay out of it," he said. That made me smile too. "That's not a bad approach," I replied. We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that, and I realized something. He had grown, not just in age, in awareness, in understanding, in ways that hadn't been shaped by entitlement, but by truth. And that gave me more peace than I expected. Carrie didn't reach out again for a long time. Not after that one message, and I didn't either. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned something important. You can't force someone to see something they're not ready to see, and chasing that kind of understanding only exhausts you. So I let it be. I let her have her silence, and I kept my peace. Until one evening, when something shifted. It was a simple message. No long explanation. No dramatic apology. Just a few words. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. I stared at the screen for a long time, reading it more than once. Not because it was complicated, but because of what it meant. Not resolution, not forgiveness, but awareness. The first real step toward something different. I didn't respond right away, not out of hesitation, but because I didn't feel the need to rush. Some things take time, and I had learned to respect that. When I finally did reply, it was simple. "I hope you're okay." That was it. No reopening old wounds. No rehashing the past. Just space for whatever might come next. Or might not. Because by then, I understood something I hadn't before. Closure doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. From knowing you did what was right, even if it wasn't easy, even if it wasn't understood at the time. That night I hosted a small dinner. Nothing elaborate. Just a few people from the book club, Susan and Tyler. We sat around the table talking, laughing, sharing stories that had nothing to do with conflict or loss, and as I looked around, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief, not victory, something quieter, stronger, wholeness. Because this moment was mine, not built on obligation, not shaped by someone else's expectations, but chosen, fully, completely. The house I had once lived in had been full of memories, but this place, this life, was full of presence, and that mattered more. As the evening wound down and the last of the dishes were cleared, I stood by the window again, looking out at the quiet street. The same way I had done so many times before, only now I felt different, lighter, stronger, clearer. Because I had learned something I wish I had understood sooner. Love does not mean surrender. Family does not mean losing yourself. And growing older does not mean becoming smaller. If anything, it means finally understanding your worth well enough to protect it. Even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something. Because in the end, what you keep is far more important than what you let go. And as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I hadn't lost anything that was truly mine. I had only let go of what was trying to take me with it. After everything I've been through, there's one thing I want to share with you, especially if you've ever felt taken for granted by the very people you love. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this. The people who benefit the most from your silence are often the ones who will question your strength when you finally speak up. For years, I believed that love meant patience, sacrifice, and understanding no matter what. I thought that if I gave enough, supported enough, and stayed quiet through discomfort, things would eventually balance out. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes what starts as love slowly turns into expectation, and expectation, when left unchecked, becomes entitlement. That's where boundaries matter. Not as walls to shut people out, but as lines that protect who you are. Because without them, you don't just lose control of your space, you lose pieces of yourself. And the truth is, no one, no matter how close they are to you, has the right to take that. Not your voice, not your place, not your identity. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It isn't cruel. It's necessary. And yes, it can come with consequences. Relationships may change. People may not understand. Some may even walk away. But the ones who truly value you will eventually see the difference between control and care. And more importantly, you will. So if you've ever been in a situation where you felt overlooked, pushed aside, or quietly replaced, I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It reminds me that none of us are really alone in these moments. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are so many stories like this, real, emotional, and worth telling, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself.